Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Study English with Frank. And today we're going to be taking a look at the different types of houses, the English names for the various types of houses. What type of house do you live in? Let's go. All right, we have 20 houses, 20 different houses that we're going to take a look at, the places where people live. And the first one we're going to talk about is a bungalow. Bungalow. Have you ever heard of this? A house that's called a bungalow. Bungalow are usually one-story houses. They're all on one level, and it is a house that provides easy access and living on a single level. Bungalow. Another type of house is called a ranch. 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 Now, you should know that the term or word ranch in English has several different meanings. One of them, the most popular use, is referring to a type of farm where people raise animals. They call that a ranch. But there's also a style of house that is called a ranch. We might want to call it a ranch style house. And the ranch is a lot like a bungalow. They are on one story, and it usually has very open spaces on the inside of the house. It's very open in the design. The next house we'll talk about is a Cape Cod. Cape Cod. Cape Cod. This style of house is quite popular in the eastern United States and Canada. A Cape Cod house is built in the shape of a rectangle. It has 2 stories, so that there's bedrooms upstairs, and it usually has quite a steep roof. It also has usually a chimney, a Cape Cod. Our next house is a cottage. 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 A cottage-style house is usually quite small in size. They might have a second story, but often that doesn't cover the whole top of a house, maybe only half of the house. They have prominent chimneys and usually a small covered porch. And oftentimes a cottage is a vacation home or maybe a weekend place, a place where people go on the weekends out in the countryside. Especially where I live in Canada, will often say, "Oh, I'm going up to the cottage for the weekend." It's just a weekend getaway house, a cottage. A villa. Villa. A villa is usually a very large one-story home. It's usually located in the countryside and is also used as a vacation or a weekend home by the wealthy. So what's the difference between a villa and a cottage? Cottage is where the poor people go on the weekends, and a villa is where the rich people go on the weekends. And the difference between the two is that the villa is usually quite large and luxurious. Big spaces, big open spaces, and big rooms for people to enjoy. A chalet. 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 Notice that the T at the end of this is silent. We don't pronounce the T. It's not chalet, it's pronounced chalet. A chalet. Have you ever been to a chalet? A chalet is usually found up in the mountainous areas, especially in the mountainous regions of northern countries. The The country where I'm from, Canada, has a lot of chalets up in the mountains. And a chalet has a steep roof, a very slippery, steep roof, so that the snow won't have a chance to gather on the roof. It just kind of slides down the roof. So if you're living up in the mountains, it's a nice design to have a chalet. A chalet with the steep roofs. Chalets often feature large windows. Chalet. Now, before I forget, I would love it if you would tell me in the comments below what type of house you live in. And even if you want to call it the name that you have in your language, that's okay. Just tell me a little bit about the design of your house in the comments below. I'd love to hear where you live, what kind of house you live in. Another type of house that's often found in the mountainous areas of northern countries is called an A-frame. 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 Can you guess why this design of house is called an A-frame? That's right, it's kind of shaped in the form of an A or a triangle. And the roofs of the house are actually also the walls of the house. There's just two walls to the house, and those two walls make up the roof. It's an interesting design. It's a simple design. You can make these quite cheaply compared to other houses, and they're very effective in shedding the snow when you're living in an area that has lots of snow. An A-frame. A log cabin. Log cabin. Log cabin. Have you ever seen one of these or a photograph of one of these? They're very interesting. They were the primary type of house that people used to build when America and Canada were first being settled, because people needed to clear their land so that they could start growing crops. And so they were chopping down a lot of trees to make their fields, and they had a lot of logs. And so people would just assemble these logs one on top of the other. They would notch them in such a way that they kind of fit together, and they'd fill the cracks with mud and make a little chimney in there to keep themselves warm. And that was their house. It was usually completely open design. Maybe later they would add some rooms, but when they first built the log cabin, it was usually completely open. The bedroom was the living room, was the kitchen, everything was in one room. Even today, people are building log cabins, but usually today the designs are much more elaborate. The logs are specially treated so that they will last longer. They can actually be quite luxurious. A log cabin today is kind of a unique type of home that some people really enjoy. A mobile home. Mobile home. Have you ever lived in a mobile home? Mobile. Some people pronounce this mobile home. Mobile, but mobile is probably the more common way to say this. I myself have lived in, I think, 3 or 4 different mobile homes over the course of my childhood. It is usually much cheaper to get into a mobile home. And if you buy the mobile home, it is something that you can actually move. If you decide to move to another state or province, you can hire a truck to pull that mobile home, and you can set it up in another place. So it's kind of convenient to live in a mobile home. Motor home. Motor home. Motor home. You've probably seen these on the highways. Big motor homes. What's the difference between a mobile home and a motor home? Well, the mobile home has wheels on it so that you can pull it, but you have to hook it up to a big truck to pull that mobile home. Whereas the motorhome has an engine as well. And so you can get in your motorhome and you can drive it around from place to place. And so this is a way that people like to see the country. They maybe are retired now and they just want to see the world. And so they buy a motorhome and drive around. And wherever they stop for the day, that can be their home. And there are lots of places across Canada and the United States where you can rent a place to park your motorhome for just an evening, and then you move on to the next town. Or if you like the place where you've parked, you might stay a week or a month before you move on to the next town. It's a very mobile life. You can see the country in your motorhome. A beach house. Beach house. What makes a beach house? Well, a beach house can really be any house that's located on or near the beach. It's usually a vacation place again that people spend their weekends at or their summers. And it can be a very simple beach house, kind of like a cabin or a cottage. But it can also be a very luxurious place that costs millions of dollars. But because it's on the beach, people will say, oh, I'm going up to the beach house. The beach house for the weekend. A tree house. A tree house. A tree house. This is usually just a small house that people build for their children to play in. They build it kind of around a big tree, and the tree supports the house. But there are also people who build real houses right up in the trees. It's not common, but it does happen. A tree house. A palace. 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 This is usually a very expensive home lived in by the very rich. And it has a lot of expensive furniture in it and expensive auxiliaries. It's just a place for the very wealthy. Castle. 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 A castle is a very large structure, usually has 20 or 30 bedrooms in it, and usually is built in the style of large blocks that may have been built even back in the 1700s, the 1800s, by the very wealthy again. And sometimes they even had a defensive system with towers, maybe sometimes even had a moat. These days, people rarely live in castles. They usually have been turned into museums. A mansion. 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 This is a lot like the palace. It's a large house with many rooms, many stories, sometimes 3 or 4 stories. It is usually, again, for the very wealthy who live in the mansions. A condominium. 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 Often this word is shortened down to simply be a condo. 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 A condominium is a large structure that may have 30, 40, 50 homes inside of it. The homes are a lot like apartments, but in a condominium, people actually own the apartments. They buy the house inside these large buildings, and they own them. However, they do not own the land. They don't have any rights to the land or the common areas inside the condominium building. So the entryways, the hallways, they don't own those. That's held by the condominium itself. An apartment. 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 This is another building with lots of units inside. Some apartment buildings in large cities can have 300 or 400 apartments inside one building with elevators going up, 15, 20 floors. They can be huge. An apartment is different than a condominium in that people don't own the units. They rent them month by month. An apartment, you rent month by month. A townhouse. 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 A townhouse is kind of like a condominium. They can be as few as 2 houses together, or it can be, a whole row of house units together on one street. And the unique thing about it is that the houses share a wall. They might have a small backyard, but the houses themselves share a wall. And a townhouse is usually owned. Sometimes people will buy a townhouse and rent it out as an investment property, but usually townhouses are owned by individuals. And they can be multi-story. In fact, you can have 2 or 3 stories in a townhouse, and that allows people to have a large living area on a small footprint. A townhouse. A duplex. 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 That is where 2 homes are built right together. They share a common wall. Usually people like the idea of buying a duplex because it's cheaper to build 2 houses together like this, where some of the walls are shared. Because everything is built at the same time, the roof and everything, you can build 2 units cheaper than you could build 2 separate houses. All right, well, those are kind of the common houses, places that you can live in Canada and the United States. For the last 3 house types that I want to share with you, we're talking about places that are usually more in other parts of the world. The first one I want to talk about is a hut. Hut. These are quite common in some of the places I visit in Africa. People build them just using sticks, straw, and mud. So they're very economical to build. You can just use materials that you can find, so it doesn't really cost you anything. It just costs you time to build it, and it's very easy to build. It's usually an open structure. The inside is just open. They might divide them with curtains so that people have some privacy, but a hut is usually grass, mud, and sticks. Usually, sometimes they can be square or rectangular, but usually they are round. A hut. A longhouse. Have you heard of these? A longhouse. Longhouse. You can find these in Malaysia, different parts of Malaysia and Sabah. A longhouse is where many families share one living space. They'll divide it up with usually curtains or other divider, but it's all one big long house that maybe 20 families share together. A longhouse. And our last one is a stilt house. Stilt house. A house that is built on stilts or pillars, big log trees. And often these types of houses are built in areas that flood during the rainy season. so that if the water comes in, you don't have to worry about it destroying the things inside your house, because it's not going to reach the floor of your house. The water usually doesn't go that high. And so I see these a lot in Cambodia, where the rainy season can flood the whole area where people live. Stilt House. All right, well, that's our lesson for today. I hope that you enjoyed it, that you learned some new terms. If so, go ahead and give it a like. And if you haven't already done so, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more lessons on English vocabulary. So long for now.